Thank you. I agree with you, and we'll keep fighting to get that funding. Mr. Hudson, as you laid out in your testimony, there's overwhelming evidence that the UAE is supplying the RSF with weapons that they are using to carry out genocide in the Darfur region. Would you agree that there is evidence to suggest the UAE has provided weapons to the RSF without the consent of the original supplier?
I can't comment on the relationship that the UAE has with China or what the end user agreement is. What I can say is that there is a UN arms embargo that exists that is nearly 20 years old on weapons transfers into Darfur, and I think it's safe to say that the UAE is in violation of that UN arms embargo. The only other country whose weapons have reportedly been found in the possession of the RSF are weapons from the United States. These are reports from the ground. They have not been verified because we don't have access to those weapons, but there are local reports and anecdotal reports of U.S. weapons having been found. I would encourage this Congress to do what it can to investigate the provenance of those weapons, to work with Sudanese authorities or other authorities on the ground to get the serial numbers so that we can trace how those weapons came to be in Darfur and in the possession of the RSF.
Thank you. Very concerning that there might be U.S. weapons involved in this. Given the role that the UAE is actively playing in supplying weapons to an armed group carrying out a genocide in violation of a UN arms embargo on Darfur, with the potential that U.S. weapons are themselves implicated, do you think it is appropriate for the U.S. to be selling weapons to the UAE while they continue to support the RSF?
Again, I can't speak to our overall policy towards the UAE. What I would say is frankly acknowledge what Secretary Rubio said yesterday and the day before, which is we have a very full and complicated relationship with the UAE. We have a very full agenda with the UAE, and I think we have seen from the Biden administration over the past few years a rather pugnacious approach to the UAE. It did not move the needle with the UAE. I don't know that a threatening approach to the UAE, frankly, is even reasonable from this administration. I think Secretary Rubio made it very clear, and we saw from the president's trip to the UAE just 10 days ago, that there is a robust bilateral agenda. Will this administration decide to hold that bilateral agenda hostage to the UAE's support to Sudan or to the RSF? I doubt it. And so that's why in my testimony I suggest, I think, a more realist approach. It might not be the preferred approach or the more optimistic approach, but it is, I think, a realist approach to acknowledge that all of these countries in the region, whatever role they are playing, they have an interest in what happens in Sudan. They have an interest in the outcome, and to lay bare the facts of that, and to not pretend that these countries are not playing a role, and to not pretend that their interests in Sudan matter less than our interests. I think we need to acknowledge, very openly and freely what these interests are, and look for a way forward that is not necessarily punitive, that is not necessarily congratulatory, but that is honest and realistic.
Thank you. And I think you're being a little diplomatic about the robust bilateral relationship when I think it's clear what President Trump is worried about is the $2 billion Emirati investment in his crypto company and the Trump Tower that will be built in Dubai.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for your leadership. A few questions. I'll yield to my colleague, then might have some additional questions as well. Mr. Cameron Hudson, I should say, Cameron Hudson. Your point that we're now into the third year and we see the full relief consequences of a distracted, disjointed, and anemic international response. We are faced with a conflict where no corner of the country is safe for civilians, where battle lines now shift by the hour, where every single neighboring country is playing a role. What can be done to put a tourniquet on. I mean, it's been 3 years. I mean, my distinguished colleague, John James, who was our chairman of the committee in the last Congress, got a very important resolution passed, H-Res 1328. It was totally bipartisan. It condemned the RSF and the SAF atrocities, called for an end to the war, which is obvious. It urged the U.S. to take immediate steps at the UN Security Council to document the atrocities, support community-based organizations, and support tribunals to hold the RSF accountable. I'm not sure how much of that was done by this Biden, or now Trump is there, but he's only been there a few short months. We're hoping this hearing and the fact that our Secretary of State, who is tasked with so many jobs and is building out his own bureaucracy as we meet here, he has a lot of people he needs to get in place, but time is of the essence. So, there's been 3 years, as you pointed out, where maybe more could have been done. So I like when you said there's a desperate need of reinvigoration of a policy, and I think this is the perfect time for all of us to do that. I know that when the Secretary of State testified before the Senate and before the House, he was very clear that they are talking to UAE. Matter of fact, my senior senator from New Jersey, Senator Booker, pointed out that UAE is a vital ally to the U.S., and then he asked questions about what we're doing. And Senator Rubio said, we have expressed to UAE and other countries that they are turning Sudan, into a proxy war and destabilizing the region and that threatens to spill over and make it worse. Thank you. We obviously have to do more, and your very specific recommendations on what more we need to be doing will be very helpful. I think you've done some of it, maybe a lot of it in your testimonies, which we'll study very carefully, all of us. But I think this has to be the pivot point. If not, as you pointed out, by the hour, more people will die, more people will be maimed and abused, and at some point it becomes even harder to put it all back together again because of the trauma and the PTSD and all the rest that follows such atrocities. So, Mr. Hudson, if you wanted to start, and then I'll go to our two distinguished colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's obviously a tall order what more can be done. I think where I have focused my attention right now is as this war has evolved over the course of 3 years, and as I reflect back on some of the initiatives of the Biden administration, right? I think we had a very traditional approach with respect to a special envoy for Sudan under the Biden administration. We've had over a dozen special envoys in the past 25 years for Sudan, so this is not a new exercise for the United States. But I think we have to think differently about how we approach this diplomatically at this stage of the war. We saw a special envoy last summer, initiate what looked like a kind of traditional, peace process, or the beginnings of a peace process, trying to bring the parties around the table, trying to support civilian voices in the diaspora as an alternative to military rule. And I think that's a formula that we have used before in Sudan, but I don't think that this conflict is right now ripe for that kind of traditional resolution. I think we have to focus on the drivers of this conflict outside of the country. There are a host of problems and a host of drivers inside the country that go back decades, that go back generations, that need to be resolved around the role of the state, governance, ethnicity, militarism, corruption, you name it, right? And Kholoud talked a little bit about that this is the last gasps of the Bashir regime that are playing out in this country right now. But I think we have to focus, at least from a U.S. perspective, because we're talking to the U.S. Congress and we're talking about recommendations to the United States government. I think the United States States government has a unique position to influence the regional actors in a way that no one else does right now, right? And I think that focusing on all of the states in the region that are playing a role, they are benefiting from this. They are also, it is also costing them, because when you look at the refugee situation in places like Egypt, Ethiopia, South Sudan, it is a burden. Chad, it is a burden on these countries. But elites in those countries are also benefiting from smuggling, from this war. And so I think we can use our influence to focus on these regional actors in ways that we haven't done before. And I think that, you know, having worked on Sudan since the days of John Danforth and all the way through, more recent envoys, I can say that, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we would not have been discussing the role of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia, of UAE. They were not a part of the conversation a decade ago, right? A decade ago, I traveled with President Bush to New York. He convened an international summit around the CPA and about the secession of South Sudan. He convened an international summit, as did President Obama, about the genocide in Darfur. There was a moment when the United States used its position on the world stage to convene the international community around the challenges that the world faced in Sudan. I think there is the opportunity for that kind of leadership from the United States. I don't know that it needs to be at the United Nations. I think that it could be within, a group of Arab states and regional states within Africa and the Arab world that convene around this conversation. And as I said in my testimony, I think we have to acknowledge that all of these countries actually have legitimate concerns with the outcome of this war in Sudan. This is their region. This is their backyard. I think that they are, in many ways, undertaking the wrong set of policies to ensure that their interests are met. But I think that rather than, as Ken said, scolding countries for having these interests, I think we have to acknowledge that they do have these interests, and acknowledge that we actually have shared interests in avoiding a worst-case scenario in Sudan. Yes, there will be things about the future governance of the country that we don't agree on, but I don't think that we can allow that to presuppose how we end this war, right? And I think we have to think about ending this war in stages. And I think we can all agree that we want a civilian democratic government to emerge from the ashes of this conflict. But until we can get to the ashes of this conflict, until we can end the fighting and silence the guns, I think it is premature to put out a resolution for some kind of civilian governance that is, I think, at least in the medium term and not in the short term.